Hello and welcome to this episode of the Conscious Grief series. My name is Tara Nash, and today I will be joined by Jason Amoroso, who is the founder of Revelation Breathwork. And he is also an international coach specializing in high performance, purpose, leadership, and self-mastery. Jason brings over 15 years of experience in the healing arts. He is a very authentic, joyful human being that encourages people to step into their highest potential in a safe and supportive space. I know this personally because I trained with Jason to become a Revelation Breathwork facilitator. And I believe that it's a very powerful tool for healing and peeling back more layers of grief. So I'm excited to share about this technique and to interview Jason. Let's see what he has to say. Welcome, Jason. I am so delighted to have you on this series and to share about Revelation Breathwork with all the listeners.
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And, just when you invited me, it was an easy yes, just knowing you and the work you're doing in the world. So I'm happy to be of service in any way that I can to you and your community.
Well, I was really excited to share about this because a lot of the times, if I'm talking to coaches or therapists, it's always a way that we're processing grief just by talking, which can be more of a sort of head level stuff and intellectual level. And I'm a real believer that in any kind of healing that we should have I always say like a three-pronged attack, like do some talking, do some movement, and some body work. And when I discovered Revelation Breathwork, it was just like another amazing sort of layers coming off of my own grief, and a way that sometimes when we talk, we can use humor, for example, to like go over our feelings. And I would love you to share with the listeners about the breath work and how that taps into our emotional level.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think a lot of what you're saying is accurate, and especially, I can only, share my own experience around grieving. And talking can be really helpful to kind of get things out, to process our thinking. There can be a lot of value in that. And I think what makes the Revelation Breathwork so effective and powerful is it bypasses, in a lot of ways, that mental level, which has its place and also has its limitations. And so, in the breathing, we just we get out of our head and really into the body. And this specific technique of Revelation Breathwork also really connects us with our the limbic part of the brain, which is where our memories and emotions are really sourced. And so it allows us to, if we're ready and willing, access some of those places. I mean, we don't have to do it. The breath does the work, as we share in our trainings, as you know. It happens if we're willing to be open. And so my experience of grieving is it comes in waves, right? It's not necessarily linear, and you can't really predict it. And so it can be Revelation Breathwork can be really great practice to have to support oneself through the different stages or waves of grief as it comes, to bring more. It's really about opening the heart space and giving ourselves permission to open our heart and just be present with whatever is coming forward in that safe space of loving. So, that's a short answer to that question.
And what about the name Revelation? How did that come to you?
Yeah, so after I experienced this technique, which my amazing wife Maura, as you know, brought me on a date night We have 4 kids. We need date nights to just stay sane and stay connected. And I resisted it for a while just because breathing, like, no, thank you. Let's go to dinner. And so finally went, and the experience just blew me wide open. And I had had other experiences like that before, but they seemed very like random. They just would happen at like a retreat or like random moments. And this, I realized quickly that, holy smokes, I can access this place inside of me and this connection with life and the universe at kind of like on demand. It was amazing. So I quickly got trained and learned more about it. And then I started wanting to bring it to people. Like, I want everyone to experience this. And so I would ask them, hey, have you ever done breath work before? And they'd be like, yeah, I've done breath work. And then I would lead them through what we're calling now revelation breathwork, and they would just like, what, after your first time, people are just like, oh my God, what was that? I've never done anything. I've never experienced anything like that before. I quickly learned that breathwork is just a very generalized term for any kind of breathing process or practice or technique, much like meditation is a very general term for a lot of different kinds of things that fall under the umbrella of meditation. So breathwork was the same. And once I noticed that, I was like, this process, it's not just the technique, as you know, it's so much more, but this process deserves, its own kind of thing. When you hear Wim Hof, people know what Wim Hof is. When you hear holotropic and pranayama and some of these things, people have an idea. And so there was nothing like that for this, at least that I had heard. I mean, the people that I was introduced to it just called it breathwork. And so I was like, this deserves something more because of the experience. So my experience doing it was one of revelation. It was a connection within to the divine within and to the divine. And so revelation breathwork just did, that's where the name came from. And it's not the expectation like, oh my God, every single time you do it, you need to have this experience. That's not what it's about. It's really just about opening and connecting within. So
I know, because I often wonder about that, because I always keep my journal next to me, and because I feel like I get revelations or, downloads, which is a connection, right? So
download breathwork, revelation breathwork, it's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing.
It's being revealed from within, from this connection, right? Then that's what this is all about. It's just being a little bit more connected, getting out of our head and our thinking and our overthinking and really just dropping in.
And the most powerful thing, I think, is the big primal scream as well.
That can be really impactful for a lot of people. And just real quickly before I talk about that, I think one of the things that people resonate with and connect with about revelation breathwork is some people have a hard time meditating and whatever that is, like being still. Their minds are very active, or they're experiencing a lot of things, so it can be challenging for a lot of people. And this technique really gives your brain kind of something to do. Okay, I'm doing. Our brain likes to do, and so it gives kind of our brain this doing, and then it kind of tricks the brain, because then it shuts everything down, that doing, that thinking, and then we can really experience that being and that presence. So that's why I think it's so effective. And then to your point, yes, part of the journey and the active part of revelation breathwork is this opportunity to emote, we invite people to really let out a big primal scream. And I think that's powerful for a lot of people, because most people aren't raised that that's an acceptable thing, to emote, to scream, to get primal, to get raw, to let it all out, to express that way, especially not in public and a lot of times in front of other people. So in a safe container, in a safe space and environment, like we have at Revelation and teach our facilitators to hold for other people, it can be deeply impactful, because we store so much stuff. It's like you brush your teeth every day, hopefully, and floss as a daily cleansing ritual. And if you don't, it builds up over time and you can have problems. It's kind of the same energetically with us, right? Things build up over time without even us really being aware of it. Just the busy nature of life right now, just things build up. And if we don't have a practice and whatever it is, doesn't have to be revelation breathwork, it can be a lot of different practices to kind of just continually clear and clean and get centered energetically. The Primal Scream, I think, is a really helpful tool for that.
I agree. I think, as we are, this is a conscious grief series, And one of the stages of grief is anger. And it's kind of like you say, people in a lot of families, and we're like, oh, we're not angry people, and people deny their anger and they're not in touch with it. And then if they are, it's like, well, where do we express the anger and how do we express it? And I think that your technique gives people that opportunity, and it's just like a really, really powerful part of it to tap into. And that anger, it is part of us, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, and a way of moving it and getting it out. I think it's a really, really powerful piece.
Yeah, and what you're saying, like my experience, the most important piece of what you're saying and what you're teaching is the acceptance of it. Like it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to be angry at like like my brother passed in February. Like I had anger, not at him passing, but just like anger in our relationship, and brothers like we had stuff and anger at God. Like I think it's okay to be angry at God. Like it's just at God. It's just about allowing yourself to be wherever you are and feel whatever you feel and think whatever you think and making it okay. It's just the judgment that it's not okay that makes it suffering. Like I can say like we have people that shout out like fuck you God, like, and that's how some people feel, but we don't get like, oh my God, can I say that to God? Is that like, am I going to get struck like no, like God doesn't care. Like God's not a human like us with like taking things personally. Like it's a universal loving energy. Like my guess would be, if we're going to put it like that, God would want you to get all that stuff out. Better out than in. You release instead of holding it all in. So yeah, and in the spaces, it's really about having a safe space where anything's welcome. It's all okay. All feelings are valid. And I think a lot of times people have a concern or a fear that if I open that door, I'll never be able to shut it. Like if I start crying, I won't ever stop. Or if I feel that pain, it won't ever go away. And that's understandable. And we know that as we allow ourselves to just open to that and in a way risk feeling or emoting in that way, that's when it passes through. And then there's so much freedom on the other side of that. But when we don't let it pass through and we hold it in and try and control it, that's when it just lingers and festers and usually even kind of grows because we're spending so much energy trying to resist it or not feel it. And then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger until it shows up in other ways. We explode at somebody out of the blue, or we're just like, we get depressed because we just, all these other things come up because we're not giving ourselves permission. So I think it's, a big part of it is just having spaces where people can go and communities where people can go. That's really important. Support.
And thank you for sharing with us about your brother. It's Louis or Louis?
Louis. He went by Uncle Louis as well, too.
I saw that written, because you and Maura have just posted these really beautiful posts about him and how it was pretty sudden in the end. And that was another reason why I felt cool to, connect with you and to ask you to speak on this. And it's interesting that you're sharing about feeling angry with him, because I think I had that with my mom. I didn't realize, I was like angry that she died. I was and again, because she wasn't here to defend herself, and I wasn't really conscious of my grief or what grief even was back then, but I was like, I think she could have tried harder to stay here. I think she could have. I often used to think perhaps if we'd had children, my sisters and I, that would have given her a strength to have continued. And now I know that this is like a really normal part of grieving, to go through these stages, if you like, or just a huge plethora of emotions that come up with grief. And again, being angry at God, that's totally something I relate to as well. Would you like to share anything more about your grief?
I think it was a process. So my brother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in like June or July of 2020. And so it was for other people, having loved ones transition or pass can be very sudden. For this, we had a process of grieving, and there's always this interesting balance or dance or just being present with like, okay, you get diagnosed stage 4, but it's not a death sentence. Like, you want to be positive, you want to be the exception in the statistics. And at the same time, you're like preparing for how you might feel if it was just this messy experience of the mental, like I said, like, okay, let's be positive, but let's also be accepting of what is. And he went through that process with his girlfriend, who became his wife in that process. And you want to be respectful. Like, if he's like, okay, like, we're beating this, we're doing this, and you don't want to be like, yeah, but like, realistically, I'm preparing for you to transition. So, just be aware of that. But everyone goes through their own feelings about it. I'm sure a lot of it's unsaid and some of it's said, or like Moore and I would talk, but we wouldn't share necessarily. And he and his wife would talk, but maybe wouldn't share things. It's just everybody goes through their own experience of it, even though Lewis was the one going through it. It affects everybody, as we all know. And so there was this process between July, let's say, or June, and when he transitioned in February of this year, which seems like forever ago now. And he was my only brother. We have 2 sisters from my dad's second marriage who were fairly younger than we are. But he was my only brother, and I ended up being like the exec. He was making plans, right? Being the executor of his estate, and just all of those things that I could have never anticipated. But when it comes to grieving, as a facilitator of Revelation Breathwork and leading classes regularly for our community, one point Moore was like, "Are you okay? Like, I haven't really seen you like grieve or cry." And this was before Lewis transition. I don't know when it was, maybe January. And I was like, yeah, like, I feel good because I'd been grieving in classes, like in the space, even as a facilitator. Like, I can facilitate for someone, and it's just about being in the energy field of love and being open, even as a facilitator, as you know. That brings healing. Healing is just loving to the places inside that hurt. So every time I would teach class, and I was teaching class 4 times a week, like I'm grieving in the class as well. And sometimes I would be like bawling my eyes out, obviously on mute while people are, and just feeling it. And then I come back and I'm holding for them as well. So it's just really this process of grieving over time. So when Lewis made his transition, that still brought its own feelings and thoughts and in that moment and thereafter. But I think I had processed a lot of it before, unlike other people who I experienced in my own family and friends who hadn't really even processed it, even though they had the same amount of time that I did. And they're still, I think, in the thick of it. Whereas for me, I feel like I've let a lot of things come through, and the connection that I have with my brother now is, I still grieve in terms of like feeling emotions and sadness, but it's a different quality. It's not like the heaviness and the sadness. It's more of like a sweet sadness now, if it comes, or a gratitude in the connection that we have now, which is, I just sent an email out today about kind of Reiki and Star Wars and the Force. And so Star Wars was a big part of my childhood with my brother, who was 4 years older, and we would act out Star Wars, and the line in Star Wars that always comes forward in relationship with him and grieving is like when Obi-Wan says to Darth Vader at the end of Star Wars, when they're kind of making that confrontation, he says, "If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." And of course, he lets Vader strike him down, and then he becomes this, more of a spiritual presence for Luke, still very much connected and communicating with Luke. And that's what my experience has been with my brother since he's made his transition.
Well, I absolutely love that. And since we are both students of spiritual psychology, your belief is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so you still feel very connected with your brother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for sure.
Signs and things like that from him.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, like going through this process, and this was even before he passed. Like when somebody would have someone pass in their life, I would always ask them like, "Hey, do you talk with them? Do you have dreams?" Because I don't think it's something people really talk about. Right. And so I wanted to I just was always curious about that. So my grandfather, one of my grandfathers passed away years and years ago, and I still feel connected with him. And he would show up as, I think people have these, whether it shows up in dreams or animals or things like that. And the day that we had his memorial service, there was a very obvious kind of message from a bee. So the bee, my grandfather is represented by the bee. So this wasn't like the first time that I felt connected to somebody, that had made their transition. But with my brother, it's like so heightened. And the little birds. So that's like how my brother can show up as little birds. And I've also had other experiences where like direct conversation with my brother. And he shared things that no one in their right mind could know other than me and him. And I'm not talking like, in my own imagination. I'm talking, even though that is, in my opinion, is very much a direct connection. Like everything is thought and everything is intention. And so and we teach this in our training, right, with intuition. Like so often I could be having a conversation or hearing something, and a part of me, usually my brain and my thinking, is like, I'm just making this up. This isn't real. But I'm also not creating it. So it's like, where's it coming from then? So for me, there's no doubt that it's a very real connection. And I've had conversations with him through other mediums and channels where it's like, there's no way they would know any of that stuff. And so it's been really cool.
Yeah, I think it is. It just gives people a lot of hope and comfort. And like you say, to sort of try and normalize these conversations that some people may be afraid to go there and talk about, and that we can continue our relationships with our loved ones who are not here on the physical level, and that we can do that in so many different ways. And obviously so many people are like, but I don't want that. I don't, I'd rather go back than have this spiritual awakening, if you like. But I do believe that it gives us a lot of comfort to know that we can continue this. The love doesn't die. The relationship doesn't have to die. We can keep that going.
Yeah. And a lot of people go through it in different ways. For example, like his wife is not really into spiritual psychology. And so for her, like it's over and she has the memories and that's her process. And that's great. Like that works for her. And that's how that's where she's at. And that's great. And there's nothing right or wrong or different. And my experience is just different than that, where it's like, it's very much, still very connected and real. And again, it's just a trend. Like energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes form. So wherever you're at in that process, I think the more people look at some of the science, so to speak, like it's just proving now what the mystics have been saying forever about consciousness, about energy. And so, I guess everyone's on their own continuum of what they are wanting to accept or believe or buy into, and that's great. Wherever you are is perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we all grieve differently and that there's no right way and there's no wrong way at all.
One other thing that, as you were saying, talking, it like brought up, like my perspective, my experience is that grieving's, it's all about us. It's not about the other person. Like the other person, like my brother's not in pain anymore. So like any of the grieving that's happening, it's me. Any of the feelings of loss, like it's all happening inside of me. So there's opportunities for me to see those things and to look and maybe be curious and to feel them. So it's all our own inner journey. It's not about the other person at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Jason. And tell us a little bit more about, because it's so wonderful hearing you talk about the work that you do, and going back to something you said at the beginning of the conversation around, how it's a real heart-centered teaching that you offer, for people that don't know about spiritual psychology and the way that you, Amora, teach the program. Just a little more about the essence of your thoughts.
Yeah, well, again, this is from our teachers, Ron and Mary Helnick at the University of Santa Monica. And I'll never forget when I think it was maybe even like an information meeting before we started and went through the 2 years master's program. That psyche, the root of the word psyche means like breath and spirit and life. But then the term psychology means like the study of like behaviors and behavior patterns and mental processes. So somewhere between psyche, meaning breath and spirit and soul, and psychology got lost the spirit and the soul and the breath, and it's more of like our mental patterns and conditioning. So that's the first thing. And then when you combine spirituality, that word, like a lot of these words have a lot of different meanings to people. I would say it's like the non-physical and the spiritual realm is the non-physical of thought, of consciousness, and I would go as far as love. And so when we teach spiritual psychology, it's the context in which we approach healing work. And the first principle as we teach it is that at the level of the true self, beyond our body identification, beyond our personal histories and stories and who we think we are, like, oh, I'm Jason, the father, and I've lived for 42 years, and all of that story, like that's a part of our human experience, but we are so much more than that, right? And that's why I love Revelation breath work, is because it gets us out of our head and our thinking and really connected to a part of us that it's just, again, like this is just a feeling and a knowing that's eternal, that resides beyond all of those things. And I think that's why it can be so powerful for people is you can experience yourself outside of a body, not literally out of body, because some people go really into the body, but you experience yourself as existing and very much alive and conscious and aware, but not being so body identified. And I think that's really powerful because our body physiologically is designed to survive. It's in survival mode all the time. And so it's constantly scanning the environment for threats, whether it's money, I need more money for food, I need to be safe, I need secure. Like the body, the nervous system is always on kind of high alert. So we can be in fear mode a lot, especially now with COVID and the state of the world the last 2 years. People are in fight or flight, fear, survival mode, because we're, in a way, over-identified with our body. And so in Revelation breathwork, you can have these experiences like I just shared, where you are very much aware and not identified with your body. And so that leads to less fear, and less fear of survival. When there's less fear, there's more love. So that's really the essence of this practice, is just getting out of fear, moving out of fear into love. And that is what spiritual psychology is as well. That at our essence, at our source, we are divine, we are whole, we are love, we are innocent, we are always connected. It's not like spirit, God, the universe, and I know sometimes those words trigger people and they don't connect with them. That's language I use. Like it's not like it's there only when we're aware of it or only when we feel it a certain way. Like it's always there. It's the force in Star Wars. It's the life force within everything. You can't separate yourself from it because it is everything. And so maybe I'm getting out there a little bit, but to answer your question, that is the approach that's our approach to healing. And the way we define healing within that approach is healing is simply, and this is from the University of Santa Monica, healing is applying love to the places inside us that hurt. And then we add another element, which is healing is simply remembering our inherent wholeness, remembering that our soul essence that is eternal. So, when I tap into that in this practice and just in my other practices, there's so much less fear, there's more trust, there's more, and we go from less fear, we can then go into the world having more fun, being more creative. Like it becomes less a game of survival and less of like, hey, what's in my heart and what do I want to be, like create in the world and be about in the world. So I went on a long tangent there, but that's it comes forward.
It's so perfect, Jason. It's just amazing hearing you talk about it, and it's so eloquently put, and it's a really powerful message to share. Like you were saying, it's not just, grief is something we most commonly associate with the death of a loved one, but it's pretty much everything, every big change and this past year and a half, coming up for 2 years, like you say, there's been a lot of global grief because of the pandemic, a lot of fear.
And I think grieving can come up in a lot of ways. Like, I think people, like, I can grieve like the life that I'm not living. Like, I can be grieving myself and my own life if I'm not, the life I'm not living because I'm afraid, I'm not taking risks, I'm not like honoring what's in my heart. Like, I can grieve that as well. Like, we can grieve a lot of different ways. It just doesn't have, it's any kind of what we perceive as a loss. Mm-hmm. Which, again, the spiritual teachings, the spiritual psychology would say, and it's okay to have the human experience of loss. That is part of, like, I'm losing something. And when we get to the core of it, there's really nothing can be lost. There is nothing to lose. We're always connected. So yes, the human experiences, I'm very much, and give yourself permission to feel that loss and feel the pain of it. And usually under the pain and the sadness of that loss is this connection that's like, it's always here. Nothing's ever lost in truth, in love, if we want to stay connected with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And I want people to know that they can take a class with you wherever they are in the world. They don't need to be where you are because you're doing it on Zoom, and it's super powerful to join a class on Zoom. And I also wanted to ask you just the final question before we wrap up. Like, in your sort of a way, how would you describe conscious grieving?
Yeah, we just had our level 2 facilitator training yesterday, and we talked about this word like consciousness, and it can be easy for the ego to hijack the term. Oh, I'm more conscious than that person, or I'm vibrating higher than that person. It's not better or worse. It's just I would say conscious is just awareness. So if one is aware of what they're feeling inside, of what's happening inside, and that takes a level of stillness. It takes, I think, a courage in being willing to feel, because so often the feelings can feel like too much, or we can't handle them, so we just want to stay busy. So we don't really have to feel, or, I know from, and this is kind of another part of my personal experience, when my brother transitioned on February 8th, for like a good month and a half, I was like, I'm good. Like, I'm fine. Like, not like I'm fine. Like, okay, I acknowledge he passed, and like whatever's coming up, I'll feel. But I was like so lethargic. I had like no energy to do anything. And everyone was like, my wife was like, you're grieving. And I'm like, I'm not grieving. I'm not sad. I just have no desire to do anything. I have no drive, no anything. And of course, once I came out of that, and it wasn't anything I did. It wasn't like, okay, I don't like feeling this way. What can I do to get out? It just was a process. Mm-hmm. And once I moved out of that experience, then I look back and like, holy crap, I was really grieving. I just didn't know it, and that's okay too. So as much as we want to be conscious and aware to do the things to feel good and make sure we're doing the right things, like sometimes it's just a process that you got to surrender to because you can't control it. So mm-hmm. Conscious grieving, I would just say, is just being aware of and permission to be wherever you are. If you're angry, be angry. If you're sad, be sad. If you're like indifferent, make that okay too, and just love and accept the process. That's what comes forward when you ask about conscious grieving.
Well, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. What an honor to talk to you and have you here. Thank you so very, very much. Is there anything else before we close that you would like to add at all?
I would like to add one thing, which So one of the things I did with my brother before he transitioned was, and this was like a couple of days, like a few days before he transitioned, was I read to him the beginning of a book that I find, there's so many amazing books on like death and grief, and even like, on death and what it really means. And so for a lot of people and sharing their experiences, and one of my favorites is called Conversations with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead, written by Irene Kendig, who is also a graduate of the University of Santa Monica. And this book is basically, it's like her conversations with people that she knew that had transitioned through a channel or a medium. And it's like written in a dialogue back and forth. And the very first page, she's like, "Hey, Jerry," this is her friend. She's like, "Hey, Jerry, what was the most surprising thing that happened when you transitioned out of your body?" And I'm paraphrasing here. And he was like, "I was still breathing." She was like, "Wait, what? You were breathing?" And he was like, "Yeah, I was still breathing." And it's just, breathing is the natural way that we receive life, and then it expands, like we expand out. And it's just this continual process of life. And we have to get out of just thinking about physical life. And this challenges or really gives us an opportunity to consider that. And I think that's so powerful, because being in the profession that I'm in now with breath work and being a trainer, and people come and think I'm an expert and authority on it, it's like breathing is it's so much more than the physical breath, again, that has us overly identified with the body, versus receiving, radiating, expressing, and that never ends. So just another way to think of ourselves beyond body identification, as souls, as essences, as we're always alive no matter what, which is our gift that we've been given. So I wanted to share that if anybody's curious about learning more and checking out that book. I think it's really powerful. It has a lot of the principles of spiritual psychology woven into it as well.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. And it's really powerful, really, really powerful.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to come and experience a class with me or any of our facilitators, you can find us at revelationbreathwork.com. We have a membership where we have live breathwork, Revelation breathwork classes every single day of the week, sometimes twice a day at various times, because we have a huge community all over the world, UK, Australia, Europe, India, everywhere, Africa, every continent. And come check it out. We've got a 2-week free trial. You can come and experience everything. We have over 60 plus on-demand recordings that you can access, including series. We have a whole series on healing of the chakras. So each chakra and the music, there's music in Revelation Breathwork that corresponds to the chakra kind of issues and opportunities. And there's all other series that we have as well, like Unlocking Creativity, The Artist's Way, Awakening the Power Within, like based on Tony Robbins' work. It's really cool. There's a lot of cool things happening. So if you're curious, come check it out. We'd be happy to have you.
And we'll put a link on the bottom of this so you can click on that 2-week free trial. Yeah.
Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to come and join with you. It is an honor as well. And I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the world.
Wow. You too. You are a teacher, and I'm very grateful to have met you and your gorgeous wife, and to be sharing your work. Yeah.
Same.
Thank you, Jason. And thanks everyone who's been watching.
Yeah, thank you.